Yeah, welcome, Chris Ahrens, to the Boardroom podcast. It's good to see you, my friend. It's a Tuesday morning. It's the 25th of February. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I too am doing well. Got my coffee going. I'm sort of doing my thing here in the morning. A little bit of. Do you do any meditation?
Ooh, yeah, something like that. I guess the short answer is yes.
What's the long answer?
I pray and try to think about my day, and it's not a rigid sort
Yeah,
of meditation.
no, I don't think anyone's is. I mean, I'm sure there are some, but it's funny because meditation is such a it can be a struggle for some people, right? And for myself, for sure.
Well, stopping for a guy like you, every time I see you, you're in my memory, you're a blur. I see you walking with like 20 famous people, surrounded by beautiful surfboards. And that's what I see. And I catch you in the hall and go, "Hey, Scott." And you kind of go, "Hi." And you got to go.
I know. I apologize for that. That's actually, I need to be better at, giving time to people. But part of my thing at the show is that I'm just trying to disappear and hide. I don't want to talk to anybody.
I, under, oh, I understand that. It's like you're balancing, you're one of those plate jugglers that's got seven plates in the air, and you can't give a whole lot of attention to one of them. So,
Yeah.
being super famous myself, I understand that.
Well, yeah. I mean, I learned my I learned my art from you, how to disappear. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Jeff Devine showed me that one time. We were doing the world's record for the most surfers on one wave, 1970, what, nine? And he said, "You need a ride?" And I went, "Yeah." And he goes, "Don't say goodbye. Just go." Because a guy like that, he's going to say goodbye for a long time.
oh, yeah. Well, let's give the listeners a little bit of insight. Chris, you've been an author for a long, long time, a writer. You've written for every major surf publication, and I've known you for a long time. I was writing questions yesterday. I was like, how long have we known each other? I feel like it was probably in the 80s during the whole longboard thing when that turned back on, the Dewey Weber event, the Del Mar Lifeguard Contest, the Oceanside Longboard Contest, those things. And does that ring a bell with you? Is that kind of when we
Yeah, I
first?
think you were about. I was fading, and you were just coming on. I was like in my oh later 30. I was probably about 38, and I think you were about 18. And
Yeah.
somebody's going, "Hey, watch this kid," And I went, "Who's that?" He goes, "He's a new Del Mar guy, Scott Bass." And it was I remember it clearly. It was north side of the pier, Oceanside Longboard Club contest, and I think you placed highly, and that revival is something that hasn't been really covered too much. It's like now that's 30 years ago.
No, I do think that that's an interesting sort of a topic or a place to delve into and excavate is that whole revival thing. It was really a fun period of time, of course, in my life, and it was crazy. There was a lot of craziness in the 80s.
Yeah.
But I remember meeting Dewey Weber. I remember going to the Dewey Weber event, and I think it was 84, 85, and going up there with them, Mike Emerson, and meeting Dewey Weber, and like
Yeah.
that's kind of a big deal for, I was like, wow,
Yeah.
and
I
hanging out
know.
with Donald and David. There was some crazy hotel motel shenanigans going on.
Well, I think one of the things I love about it is that nobody in sports gets a second chance. And here comes people that nobody had really heard of for a while: Donald, David, Dale Dobson, Skip Fry, and suddenly they're a big thing again. And what a cool thing! And coming up underneath are guys like you, and then young Joel Tudor, who was 13. I'm gonna turn off my phone. You mind if I?
No problem. Well,
Yeah,
let's be clear. I was just kind of a middling level guy. I appreciate your kind words, but there were guys like Joel and like Josh Baxter a little bit later on, and of course Chris, who's the great surfer that we lost in a car accident?
Just believe us.
Yes, Chris Ahrens. What a sweet guy.
Yeah.
Um, there was quite a few guys that were just next level surfers, and yeah, it was good stuff. Well, let's shift gears real quick because you've written a book. It's called Windansea: Life, Death, Resurrection, and so I think it's more than appropriate to discuss Windansea and all things Windansea. And in that vein, um, I will say it was, not too long ago, maybe 15 or 20 years ago that, yeah, maybe, I don't know, let's call it 15 years ago, that you turned me on to Carl Ekstrom's asymmetricals.
Mm.
I think I was at Swami's or somewhere, and you're like, Scott, you got to check these boards out. I'm digging these things. And so tell me a little bit about, let's start there with Ekstrom and Windansea. Where does Ekstrom fall in your in your view?
Gosh, he started surfing Windansea in 1948 when he was 7, and immediately broke his teeth on one of those planks. His brother had been a surfer, so I did an entire book just doing a. He's got a great memory. He knows everybody. He was the first guy ever to get Butch Van Arsdalen in the water, and then his brother is like second, just kind of passed the torch from Woody Brown to Woody Ekstrom, and his other brother pulled Bob Simmons out of the water when Bob Simmons was dead. So he's a really, the Ekstroms and especially Carl are so central to the whole thing. And then became a partner with Pat Curran and Al Nelson, and was kind of rivals with Mike Henson, which kind of everybody was for a time. And you turned me on. Actually, you turned me on to the idea that Henson was actually a really good guy, and I'd never seen that till the end, and I realized that, yeah, there's a sweet guy in there waiting to get out, and he's an amazing story in himself, and I'm so glad. I'm so glad I listened to you, and I went to see him, and just had a great time, and saw the guy who was always there, that was, I don't know, maybe protective for whatever reasons. We all have.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Carl was a great surfer and made incredible surfboards, but kind of a, not a I'm over here kind of guy, and so was really passed over by surf history for the most part. But he saw it all. He was there probably from, like, gosh, from Buzzy Bent, and Woody Ekstrom had already left. So he went through the eras of his brother and guys like John Blankenship, Peter Parkin, who made the first skateboard at what place they called Parkin's Palace in, gosh, I think probably about 1948, and it just really has such a rich sense of history while staying completely in the present. Designing wave pools, and so I couldn't find a better person to tell me the story of Windansea. I will probably only surf Windansea 20 times myself,
Yeah.
but between he and Chris O'Rourke, I got a real good sense of a certain period. So the book starts with Woody Ekstrom. Well, I'm sorry, Woody Brown in
Yeah, that's, if
1907.
I can interrupt, because you mentioned Woody Brown just a minute ago, and I was like, okay, here's a guy I know nothing about. When I
Mm.
read parts of your book, this is what I learned. So tell me a little bit more about sort of the seedling, the first surfer, if you will, at Windansea, Woody Brown.
There's I was fortunate to meet him. Our friend Rob Greaves was doing Liquid Stage, the KPBS production, and he flew Woody Brown over, and Woody Brown was, what an amazing character. I mean, when I met him, he was 88, and he was going into nursing homes and taking care of people that were 78. He had a kid at 76 years old. And so he was from the East Coast and he was a glider pilot. His wife would take him, tow the car off the Cliff of Blacks and slingshot him into the wild blue yonder, where he set a world's record, 23 hours in a glider, crashed his glider on the beach. Now, this is 1937, had never seen a surfboard, even a picture of one, and found a piece of driftwood and rode this little wave in the white water and said that was kind of fun, and went and built a surfboard, just not knowing what a surfboard should look like, and he made it like an airplane wing. Apparently, Skip Fry has a replica of this board. I heard the board weighs 14 pounds because it was made like an airplane wing, and he took it to Windansea, and Don Oakey and Matusek and some of the guys that were there, I think Eisenhower, they saw it and they said it was the best surfboard they'd ever seen. And then Don Oakey said he made brave men out of us all because he would take off on anything. So he taught himself to surf. And later,
Was Woody the first guy at Windansea, or were these other guys that you mentioned, Oakey and Eisenhower, were they already surfing there?
they said, Oakey said that Woody Brown was the first guy to surf Windansea. Now that's, things get lost to history at a certain point.
Yeah.
Um, and, and then you have the idea, did the Kumeyaay, were they surfers on their reed canoes? They paddled their reed canoes out into the bays and to harvest shellfish. And no doubt they rode a wave or two on those things when they came in. So
That's an interesting
Brown
thing,
is
too,
as
right?
far back as I could go.
The idea that Matt Warshaw's made this sort of line in the sand that if you're riding a wave for work, it's not surfing. If you're riding a wave for recreation, it's surfing. But there's a gray area. Are you telling me that when you're riding your reed canoe in, you're not enjoying the ride, even though you're bringing in shellfish and the fish that you've caught? It's a tough
Well,
place.
I think that's, Warshaw draws those lines pretty clearly, and he does a what a I mean he's the guy, for surf history, but he I think one you go and you're picking up the fish and you're bringing it back to shore, but then you might just go, that was kind of fun. I wonder what it feels like without a big load of fish in it, and without that guy holding me down, and so go out there and who knows, and perhaps people are competitive by nature. How different from us were they? Probably not so different. I'll bet you these cowrie shells that I can ride a bigger wave than you on my canoe, and I can stand up on it. Who knows, and
Yeah, for
I
sure.
think surfing's probably as old as humankind.
Yeah. Wow. That's a whole nother topic. Like, where did it
Yeah.
start? So Woody Brown. So Woody Brown was the first guy, at least according to history, as muddled as it may be.
Right.
Hmm.
And he then his wife died in, what was it, 41, and he went to Hawaii, and there he invented the modern catamaran. And so Woody Brown went to the top of three sports. He went to the top of sailing, surfing, and gliders, and those not hang gliders, but pre-hang gliders. And he said that I got to the top of all those sports and there was nothing there. Spiritual guy, so he had some really interesting insights. So I won't tell that to Kelly Slater, but Kelly Slater might say the same thing.
I bet Kelly's, I think he's pretty open-minded to that.
Yeah, probably. I've never sat down with him. I've never talked with him, and
Yeah, I haven't either.
I,
Um,
my knees would probably knock a greatest surfer of our time.
I know, I'm sure that I've said this before, even on this podcast, that I would probably be a fanboy and not, in fact, our friend Gary Taylor, may he rest in power and rest in peace. He told me one time that he interviewed Tom Curran, who was, 20 years his junior, and he was just, awestruck by the fanboy syndrome.
Yeah.
Hey,
That's a nice thing about getting older is it's a whole different. I don't feel what those guys are doing. It's a completely different sport than what I knew.
yeah,
I mean, you could lumber to the tip in Tank 5. I'd write home about stuff like that.
yeah, yeah. That's what we're shooting for that right now. Hey, What's interesting as we have this talk is that you mentioned Woody Brown, and you mentioned Carl Ekstrom as sort of, Carl's had some notoriety and well deserved, but he's also very he's not necessarily looking for it. And you mentioned a couple of other guys, and Al Nelson was one of them. And it's kind of funny as I think about it. Windansea is this very famous place with this, larger than life sort of myth around it. But there's quite a few guys that just, it's almost like Windansea overshadowed the personalities. Because Al Nelson's another guy I think probably hasn't been excavated enough or given his due as, um, you know, uh, I don't know how you want to phrase it, a legend or an icon in the area. I know Carl points to him. I know my friend Bruce points to him. So tell me a little bit. First of all, do you think that Windansea overshadows and is more powerful than the individuals that sort of hung out and played there?
That's such an interesting point. Windansea, yes, but when you think about, I think about Windansea, and I think about here's this little place, and from it comes Diffenderfer, Henson, Butch Van Artsdalen, the Pattersons, which is a whole other story. L. Nelson, and oh, you wanted to talk about L. Nelson, so sorry, the ADD is kicking in. I just wish you could pass me some of that coffee, but so L. Nelson, he's a what a character. He was partners with Pat Curran, and it's in the book, but Ekstrom talks about how Curran and L they like to tip a few, so they would get money for boards, and they would go up to well, what's the name of that place with it? They would buy wood in Southgate.
Oh, General Veneer.
Get general veneer. And so they'd go, okay, we're going to make your boards. They got all the money for the boards. And then they would disappear, and they came back with with no wood. And people go, well, what happened? And apparently Curran said, well, we were driving home. We stopped by Mexico for a little bit. And, and Ekstrom goes, you can tell they've been in Mexico by their feet, because their feet had this black grunge on it. And they just looked like hell. And so and as the story goes, and he said, well, and then Velzy's guys came and they hijacked all the wood. So he said everybody eventually got their surfboards, but he goes, they wanted to hang them from the shack. And there were some tough guys around there. Billy Graham was one of the guys that was one of the main enforcer guys, and not the evangelist, by the way, in case anybody should be confused on that. And Tiny Brain Thomas was another. The story of Tiny Brain, how he drove Billy Graham's car into the surf at Windansea because he wanted to make a reef. And Extra going, he's going to kill you, because Bill Graham was a real hardcore, gnarly guy. And Tiny tells him, yeah, he'll be mad for a little while, but when he sees how good the waves are, he's going to thank me, and I'll name the spot after him.
I guess these guys are all post World War II types, like the Pete Peterson generation, where they came back from the war and they were kind of hanging out in like 48 or whatever, right around then. And I'm assuming that these guys were all of that generation.
I think so, and I think something that happened that isn't talked about very much is that my dad came back from World War II. There were a lot of men that had PTSD, completely undiagnosed. And my father was certainly one of them. I'd been in the Pacific Theater, and so there were, I've never seen anything like it. There was, like, we were taught to fight. I mean, my dad would, say, no, you got to learn how to fight. You got to learn how to fist fight, and fights were a big thing. Everybody was pounding on each other, and I don't see it as much anymore. I don't see that sort of thing anymore. It's something that generation had. Yes, so those were people that had come back from the war. Woody Ekstrom had gone in the service, but they put him on the U.S. ski team and sent him to Germany, where he skied the whole time.
Wow, good for
Yeah,
him.
pretty good gig.
So Al Nelson, another one of these guys, like legendary, um, had a great influence as far as these other guys on shaping, for sure. On I think Diffenderfer, I think is Diffenderfer, do you think you mentioned some guys? You mentioned Al Nelson, you mentioned Ekstrom, you mentioned Diffenderfer. We can throw in Rusty and Bill Castor and Tim Bissell. There's
Yeah.
quite a few craftsmen, more than a handful. And I'm going to do something silly, but I'm going to ask you who you think is the greatest shaper from this place known as Windansea. And I know it's a silly question, so do your best.
Not at all.
Do your
And I
best.
don't, I don't,
Pick
I
one.
don't consider it still, well, if we weren't on national TV, I'd say it was silly, but if it was
Yeah,
just between you and me, but since the world's watching,
right.
well,
Yes.
uh,
Actually, it's my wife and your wife.
yeah, I, no, there's, different eras. And so Lloyd Baker was a very good shaper.
Oh, of course, yes.
And, and I don't know. I've never seen a board by Woody Brown, but I imagine he was. A lot of people made their own boards. Woody Ekstrom, Carl Ekstrom was an absolute perfectionist. And then Mike Henson. So it's all kind of different. Mike Henson, he was so, even before the down rail in the mid '60s with the red fin. If you look at those rails, they're completely different. They're what we called the knifed rail back then, and they really penetrated. And Henson understood something about that. So he, in his own way, and then Bill Castor was such a craftsman, and Tim Bissell is such a craftsman, and Rusty was the most scientific I'd ever seen, because he would look at the size of a person's foot. Who does that? And so you have a lot of different people that were brilliant. Pat Curran, look at those Curran guns. Or, I mean, who makes a board like that? L. Nelson. If you see some L. Nelson boards, he was a phenomenal craftsman and absolute perfect. L. Nelson also built planes. He built the last plane for T. Claude Ryan. T. Claude Ryan built the Spirit of St. Louis, and he was a glider pilot and just a brilliant guy, absolute genius.
Yeah.
And like a lot of those guys, pretty hardcore drinker. Yeah, I remember I went to his house to interview him for a story I did in Surfer's Journal. Probably been 20 years ago now. So it's 10 o'clock in the morning, and he's poured himself a couple fingers of scotch, and takes a sip, and he goes, "I can do this. I'm not working." And takes a sip and looks at me, and he goes, "Oh, I haven't worked in 20 years." Yeah, those guys were somehow functional through all that, and sort of functional.
Yeah.
Butch and those guys. I mean, amazingly, Butch lasted till 38 years old, and he's a book, of course. I mean, there have been books about him, a story all his own.
Yeah. Yeah. An interesting guy. And, when I think about surfers that, I'm just going to use the word burned out, or just it's almost like they got their youth left them. They got into their mid 30s, especially back in the 60s when your mid 30s, it was like you were an older adult, whereas now and, 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 and it's almost like the dream was gone. Like it's like, what else is there to live for? I've surfed incredible waves. My youth is now behind me, and
Yeah.
I don't know what to do. I'm sort of lost. And again, I'm sort of using some editorial embellishment here. I'm just assuming that there's a lot of surfers and from that era that just felt kind of like hopeless.
I remember having that feeling, being like 28 years old, going to the beach. Everybody's gone that I knew. There's a bunch of young guys there, and I'm going, and I felt really lost. Now, surfing wasn't my whole life, but it's what I concentrated. And I thought, God, 30, 40, ugh. It didn't seem. I was not willing to turn that page,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of that. I think that does happen. I remember Bobby Patterson was. They said that he was probably the Windansea guys said he was the best surfer in the world, and the Oceanside LJ would say that Phil Edwards was. So they would meet Phil Edwards. Ekstrom would bring up Bobby Patterson to Terramar, which they called Waiuli, and LJ Richards would bring Phil Edwards to the place that they called him the Waioli Kid, as you know. And so they would surf together, and they were so different. Bobby Patterson rode a board that was like 7'6", weighed about
Wow.
125 pounds, and this was like in 1952,
Yeah.
and was phenomenal. So we now flash forward. I'd never met Bobby Patterson. I'm surfing Doheny, and he was up working at Hobie by then, 30 years old, and we're watching him surf from the beach. And my friend said, "Gosh, he used to be so good, but he's 30 years old, you know. And he got married and has a kid now, and so you can't expect anybody to be good at 30. I mean, there's isn't that something? I mean, to think that that was
Yeah, well, it's funny as you mentioned that. I think the name that pops into my mind is Dale Dobson. This guy was so incredible up until, I don't know, let's call it 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, when he
yeah,
just stopped surfing. And Dale, of course, is still with us, thank God, but I think he's not doing so good right now. But Dale was a guy who chased it. I mean, he was surfing hard into his mid to late 60s, and not just paddling out and being a part of, but kind of owning the space, so to speak. Speak to me a little bit about Dale Dobson and Windansea.
yeah. Dale Dobson, Bird Huffman, who's probably handled more surfboards than anybody in the world, said that he mentioned two people of Windansea that he thought were the best surfers he'd ever seen. One was Dale Dobson, the other was Brew Briggs. But he talked about Dale showing people how to switch. I mean, I never knew if Dale was a natural regular foot or a goofy foot. But there's that famous picture of him that Rick Doyle took at Windansea, just stand up barrel on a longboard. And it was in Ocean Magazine recently. He was so gifted. And when I didn't see him surf Windansea, but I saw him surf a lot of other places. And it didn't matter where he surfed. He had such a high surf IQ. He understood things that nobody else seemed to understand: where to turn, how to get deep, when to switch stance, and all very under control the whole time. When surfing came back, and when longboarding came back, it must have been about probably maybe 1980 at the latest. I was paddling out at Cardiff Reef, and I used an old plank that I hate to call them planks. I hate the word logger and plank. It's really an insult. But when people say I'm going to ride my log, I go, "Oh yeah, go tell Phil Edwards you're going to ride your log." Not a nice thing to say. But anyway, I digress. So Dale, I'm paddling out, and I saw Dale run to the nose and turn from the nose, and I thought, how did he do that? Like he's hanging five, and he's redirecting the board, and he's riding the wave still, and just magic feet, and just smiling and cutting some people off. But heck, I didn't care. I wanted to see him surf. I was going like that guy. And I would have to say, at nearly 40 years old, could have been at least one of the top 5 longboarders in the world at 40, which is really saying something.
Yeah, I've always felt that Dale was just a sort of unfortunate his timing
Yeah.
relative to what the surf world was doing. In other words, I would suggest to you that in the 80s, when surfwear manufacturing took off and the surf industry blossomed and got really big, there was a lot of money, and professional surfing began to take off like no other with Mark Richards and the Twin Fin. If and Dale was just 10 years too early. Like Dale would have been, I think Dale Dobson would have been the world champion had there been a path and a actual world tour in, say, 1973 rather than 1983. He was just not, the timing was wrong because he was just an incredible competitor. Like you did not want him in your heat. And all you have to do is look at his contest history. His
Oh,
results are ridiculous. And I mean, he would go up to Santa Cruz and win 4As. He'd go up to Mount, he'd go up to wherever. And he was dominant, and it wasn't just a regional thing. And like I said, I feel like he just a bad timing situation.
Well, I think he might be comparable to someone like Michael Peterson, where Michael Peterson was a phenomenal surfer, and you add water, and Dale was an absolute genius. I don't think he was as comfortable in the other world, for who knows what reasons. But and I don't think he gave it a lot of thought to sponsorship and how that works and everything. His thought was, I mean, he was brilliant with fins. He knew so much about fins and so much about surfboards, and people don't give him a lot of credit for that either. But you're right, and I just think that there are some people that Dale being one of them that
Yeah.
could have been, I think that's a really good call. He could have been a world champion and could have been highly sponsored, but I don't think that he gave that the thought necessary to make that happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Would have done well with a manager, I'm sure.
Yeah. You're right. As I think about it, he would have done well in the competition sort of prism, but outside of that, might have been tough to market Dale potentially. But uh, so there's some more characters about Windansea, but before I get into them, I'm kind of interested in this whole pump house. Like, is Tom Wolfe a problem? Is the pump house gang a problem? Did Tom Wolfe good or bad for Windansea?
Well, I
And maybe
think
give some context to the listeners who don't know who Tom
I
Wolfe
would
is.
say
What his
Tom
famous
Wolfe. Yeah, Tom Wolfe. It was called the what was he called? The premier new journalist by Rolling Stone. Elevated him to this place that I guess he belonged in. He did the electric Kool-Aid acid test, A Man in Full, Bonfire of the Vanities, The Right Stuff, and it's hard to criticize a guy that gets $14 million and an advance for his book, But as far as surfing goes, you see some dandy show up with a plantation boss suit, you're gonna think the guy's a narc, so nobody's gonna talk to him. And he shows
Can I
up.
just say that you used the word dandy, and I'm just quite impressed that came out. Go ahead. Yeah, Tom
My
Wolfe,
age
dandy.
showing. Yeah, he's a dandy. He's a dandy lad. But so he
So you
shows up
second
there.
not.
Ekstrom said that when he showed up, that Curran and Butch and those guys were underneath the shack, and he started kind of inching his way over there. And Curran goes, "If that guy comes over here, we're gonna pass him." So he goes over to the pub house where there's kind of like there's some guys that you and I both know, and some of them are maybe not maybe slightly unsavory characters, but somehow, and I'm very critical of Tom Wolfe, he got it completely wrong. He
Yeah.
calls, I mean, he didn't even pay attention. He calls a kick up, kick out a kick up. He calls a section a suction. He even gets the words to a Rolling Stones song wrong. I mean, how can you be alive and not know that it says, "I can't get no satisfaction"? He writes, you can read it in the Pump House Gang. He writes it as, "I ain't got no satisfaction." Now, if you're a journalist, as you know, you better pay close attention and not spell people's names wrong. I mean, I just try to get people's names spelled right. And I've been guilty of all that and more, but I'm not
I'm
getting
the
$14
worst.
million
I am the
dollars
worst.
for an advance on a book.
Right. No, no, no. I'm the worst. I believe me. I look back at some of the stuff I've written, and I'm
No,
like,
I'm worse.
my God, that is the worst thing. I can't believe I.
I was talking to Warshaw about that, and I go, and he said, "Yeah, do you remember this article that you wrote?" And I go, "I'm trying to bury that. I'm trying to forget that guy. I thought it was so great at the time, and I look at it and just cringe and go like, oh." But I think that's good. That shows progress. I used to, when I taught writing, I'd tell people, I'd say, if you can't look at stuff you did 5 years ago and at least cringe a little bit, you're not
Yeah.
progressing. It's
Humility through humiliation is what I like to
yeah.
call
There's a method.
it. So Tom Wolfe, the Pump House Gang, it did sort of punch Windansea into sort of the cultural zeitgeist, if you will. And was it good or bad, do you think? Or
I
not?
think
What was the effect of the Pump House Gang by Tom Wolfe?
I think it had zero effect on the people that you and I knew.
Yeah,
And just sort of like, what's this? It's kind of like Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
right.
It's just sort of like, okay, they got surfing wrong. What's new?
Yeah.
And but he has the distinction of probably being the first guy to get surfing completely wrong. So there's that.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Well,
Surfing's really hard. Surfing, I don't, Scott, surfing to me is so difficult to write about. To write about, it either becomes really corny when people try to write about it. It becomes this grandiose man against nature thing. It sounds so hokey. I don't think probably the best. William Finnegan did a great job in when he talks about Ocean Beach, writing about surfing, and I just go, God. When I first read that in the New Yorker, I was just going like, like throw away the pen. This guy, he's the Kelly Slater of
yeah,
uh, surf writers.
yeah, for sure. What a great writer. And you're right. It's always been, it's just it's anything that I've written has been a little bit hackneyed. Anything that I read that it's funny because the last thing I often say, look, please don't make a movie about how surfing is spiritual. Please don't make a movie about how it's changed my life and I'm gonna, and it's all of these things that are sort of trite and cliche, but they're so true. Like that's kind of how I feel about it. It's just that no
Yeah,
one can seem to convey it effectively because I think that, it's like that famous ad, only a surfer knows the feeling. It's almost not supposed to be uh, written about it. There's such a deep connection. And this almost sounds like that cliche thing and here I am saying it, but it's such a deep thing and such a personal thing that, that we will never be able to get it right, I don't think, however we try to put the content out there.
I think that's true. That's why I concentrate on the people. It's sort of, you know, um, John Steinbeck could have written about what it's like to fish in Monterey Bay and what the canneries were like, but he concentrated on the people. And the people that I grew up with had that same nobility and singleness of mind and just the most amazingly wealthy people with nothing. And I mean, just working. I used to work one day a week at the Penny Saver, and I had enough for enough for everything, including a surfboard, one day a week. And it was, but I lived with four other guys in a one-bedroom house, and a lot of people did that because your values were that you wanted to serve,
Yeah,
and it meant everything. And yeah, I remember Phil Edwards wrote something about how there's so much to do in California that surfing. This was like in the early '60s that the new surfers were probably going to come from Australia because they didn't have all the stuff that we had. Now kids now, I mean, I guess that theory falls apart when you see how good surfers are now. And there's a lot of distraction, a lot of other stuff to do. But when
yeah.
surfing gets a hold of you, there is only one thing to do. I don't know if that made any sense or not.
It does, and it's an interesting thing because I can remember the time when I was whatever age, 14, when I'm like, this is it. Like, there's nothing I'm doing besides this for the rest of my life. And oh, and now I've kind of put my life in this silo. This is how I'm going to dress. This is how I'm going to talk. This is where I'm going to go on vacation. This is where I'm going to go to school. All of these things are based on the fact that I'm going to ride waves every day. And um, and then there's a certain part in our lives where it's like, okay, that actually it doesn't need to take a backseat, but I want it to take a backseat because I don't want to be owned by it anymore. And there's this really interesting conflict and a paradox. Um, and I don't know, again, here I am at a loss for words trying to describe it, but I think that, we talked about Butch when he died at 38. There's that moment in older surfers' lives where and Carl's a great example. I asked Carl a long time ago, like Carl quit surfing when I think the last time he rode a wave, he was probably 30 or something like that. He stopped surfing at a pretty young age. And there are others that have done this, and it fascinates me. And now I'm sort of in that space where I'm like, okay, I get it. I'm almost 60 and it's kind of easier to understand. But when you're 25, you're like, why did that guy stop surfing? I don't understand. And I don't know where I'm going with this line of logic other than to open it up for you to uh, to espouse on.
Well, Carl said to me, he said, "Well, I'm going to practice that same cutback for the next 30 years." And it can be, it gives you so much. Surfing gives you so much. And then at some point it starts taking, like everything that you become. I mean, it's when you think about it, I don't know how it differs from drug addiction. The more you do it, the more you have to do it. The quality has to get better. You miss every appointment. Your body starts falling apart when you don't do it. They say it's a healthy addiction, but at some point it's not.
Yeah.
And I remember I was in Australia and controversial figure, Taurus Henson, said to me, he goes, "Do you want to go meet Rudolf Nureyev?" Well, Rudolf Nureyev was a defector from Russia, the top ballet star in the world, and had so much to say. And we're going to go have lunch. And I go, never being 6 foot, why would I want to do that? And now I look at it, I go, I could kick, but I don't remember the session. But I would have
Right.
met a guy who had defected from Russia, had been on the cover of Life magazine, had so much so gifted in so many ways. I could have learned a lot about surfing from that guy, really. But yeah, it starts limiting you, and it starts, you're too tired to. I never thought I would go like, yeah, future. What are you talking? I mean, like I have to work really hard. I'm 76 now, and I have to work really hard because I took my retirement when I was 19. You know,
Yeah.
and I don't regret that one little bit, but I just have to keep myself going, moving, creating because it's like, man, I'm on a hamster wheel right now, and it's a good thing. I feel good about it. I'm not complaining about it at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. No, I understand. I too have taken my retirement early, but it's okay. It's funny as you were mentioning addiction and surfing as an addiction, and I had this revelation I mean, I've had it before, but it really struck me the other day because I was thinking about greed. I was thinking about how greed in the world seems to be, you know, the overarching theme. And and I and I was very judgmental. I was getting in this really judgmental space. I had the Excalibur sword and I was cutting people with the sword of judgment. And I realized that I am incredibly greedy. My life in the water, in the surf, is incredibly not anymore. Hopefully, I'm trying to fix it, or change my ways. But I was an incredibly greedy surfer. I mean, I was out there to catch every wave, your wave, my wave twice. Like it and it's kind of sad. Like as I look back, I'm like, oh my God, that because as you get older, you start to think about your legacy, and you're like, oh, my legacy in the water is really not something I'm overly proud of when I think about some of the greed. And here I am, placing the judgment of greed on others, and I had a bit of a God shot where it was like, okay, my heart's been convicted a little bit here. Now, the good news is, you know, I can move forward in these next
Yeah.
years and have a little bit more love in my heart, a little bit more aloha, a little bit more Duke, But um, anyway, I don't know where I'm going with all this, other than it's fascinating the addiction part of surfing and how it can just take control of you.
And I think we lose sight of friends and other people. I too. I mean, I probably wouldn't say I quit surfing, but I tapered off after about 28 years old because I didn't know how to do anything. I remember I gave away my surfboards and said, I have to learn something. And I go, well, maybe I can put words together for a living. I'll try that. Gave my boards away, didn't surf, didn't go anywhere. And then I started looking at people as people, and I go, guys would go, yeah, you cut me off on like every time I'd see you, just you drop, you didn't even look, and I was like that. And I started going like, what did I miss? What did I mean, we've missed so much by just, there might be, the halibut might be running and you're sitting on the beach complaining because there's no surf and you're going like, God, you go out and spear a halibut. What a fun thing to do that is. Or go on a catamaran or all these, or read a book. Hey, how about that? But there's so many, yeah, just that addictive thing can really hold us back. And I think it's so good to be able to turn the page and you know we all have regrets in our youth, and hopefully fewer regrets as we age.
Yeah. Yeah. What, um, getting back to your book a little bit, Windansea, Life, Death, Resurrection. How did the title come about? What is obviously these themes run through the book.
Hmm. Well, it's kind of what we're talking about in a way. It starts off with this, give the full life of the party never ends. You're just going hard, going out, paddling out, party Friday night, party in the surf. There's the life. And then Butch Van Arnstalen dies. And there's the death. And then Chris O'Rourke, I started writing about Windansea in 1980 with Chris. I would sit down and I was kind of his primary caretaker. And Chris O'Rourke, for those who might not know, was considered the best surfer in California at one time. He and Brew Briggs were neck and neck. They're fantastic surfers, and there's a guy, that what was the question again?
I was asking you about the title of your book relative to like the
Well,
themes of life, death, and resurrection.
Chris had a spiritual awakening, and that goes to the resurrection part, and he died at 22 years old from Hodgkin disease. And one of the things that I learned is when I first met Chris O'Rourke, he was 14 years old. I was like 23, 24, and I took off on it was a big swell 1975, for those that remember the Southwest swell in 1975. It was kind of famous for its time. And I took off on a good sized wave and I had a cord on, which was a real sin there. And I this kid came up behind me. I felt that my board just something bang on the rail, and looked back, and there's this little sunburned kid, chapped lips, and he's screaming, calling me, "Get out of here!" And I happen to know some of the guy. His deal was he was this little guy, so he's flipping me off, and he's paddling me out, and I'm following him like I would describe it as like a dumb fish following a baited hook, and he gets out in the lineup, and there's these big guys out there. I happen to know them, and he moves to the side, and they're supposed to kick my ass. Well, they were my buddies, so they kind of went, "Well, what's going on?" And said, "This guy," and it's like, "He's all right, let him alone." And we didn't become friends, but he did reluctantly apologize. Well, gosh, this is nobody's ever done anything like this to me, but this parallels the Windansea. It's not what you think it is. I mean, even the wave looks like this flat, mushy peak from shore that's real close to shore. You start paddling out, you realize it's a hard breaking wave and it's kind of far from shore. And it's all this chaotic water comes in and it turns into a good wave. That's the same way that the people are. Chris looked like this angry, crazy, guy that just wanted his way. And so now he's been diagnosed with Hodgkin disease, and he's got a hole in the side of his head the size of a softball. He didn't have a plate put in his head yet. And he called me up. I was going through a horrible divorce, and everything in my house is gone. My credit cards are frozen. My cars are gone. Everything's gone. But the phone worked. I came home after just this devastating, no concept that was going to happen. None. And calls up, it's Chris O'Rourke. And I told him what happened, and he said, stay right there. And he drove from his house in La Jolla to my house in Leucadia, and drove me to his house, said, put your clothes in a bag, and took his son, put his kid in his room with his wife Jill, and he was like, gosh, he was probably like 18 or 19 at the time. Gave me a room to stay in, said, here's a board to ride, stayed up with me, held on to me, just said, you're going to be all right. I didn't even know him that well. And so I saw that's not what I thought he was. Just like when I found Henson was not who I thought he was. There was this perception, and you look deeper and you go, man, there's a reason for Dale Dobson cutting you off, that he wants every wave. He didn't have such a good life. I mean, he told me one time, he said, I had 6 stepfathers, and I'd never even seen a photo of my real dad. And that hurts, And so we don't take that into consideration when you go out in the world. That guy cut me off. And so I was thinking that about Chris. And so the resurrection part is, I had an opportunity to make sense of his death. That was really painful to me. I mean, I was there. He stayed with us, and I thought, now I will do anything for this kid, because what he did for me. Yeah, actually, I ended up calling Dick Dale. So Peter Townend had Dick Dale's phone number. We were going to do a La Paloma theater fundraiser for Chris, and there were some local talent, and they didn't sell too many tickets. Tickets were $7. And I called up Dick Dale, and on a phone call, he said he brought the whole band over. He never met me. He goes, and he said, any surfer who won't spend $7 to help this kid isn't worth the wax he stands on. And I thought, man, that is what a cool thing, But anyway, that ties into. So the resurrection is, I believe in eternal life, and so it's life, death, resurrection.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, I got to get you my address so I can get a book.
Yes,
By
please.
the way, I want to pay full pop.
No, you sent me money.
Maybe I should just go on Amazon and do it the smart way.
You sent me money. I have to get you a book. You don't have. You did when I was doing my crowdfunding, because
Oh, that's right. I just sent you some money.
I am a hand-to-mouth.
I forgot about that.
Freelance writer. I mean, I'm the freelance writer diet, man. But
You've written so many nice words about me over the years that I should,
You
I
deserve
owe you.
it.
I owe you.
Okay. Well, it wasn't that much money.
Yeah. Okay, so the book, look, Windansea, Life, Death, and Resurrection by Chris Ahrens. Where can they get the book? Is it available on Amazon? How does somebody go about it?
It's not available on Amazon. We're doing it. It will be, but the first batch sold out in about a month. And thank you very much. And so you can get it through us, and there's I can give my PO box, or I can through my email.
Yeah.
If people can contact me through their email, and it'll be available at Bird Surf Shop, Mitch's in La Jolla, DG Wells Bookstore.
So
OB.
if they're listening and say Jersey or North Carolina or whatever, and they want to get the book, would you recommend that they reach out to one of the surf shops?
No, they can go. They can go to me, and I will.
How do they
All the
get a
books,
hold of you?
all the books are signed. So every book is signed, and I'll personalize it and get. But they can reach out to me at Paralandra Pub. Oh, I know.
You better spell that.
Yeah, it's P as in. Oh God, why did I choose that name?
Just Chris at Gmail, you know what I mean?
That would make so much more sense. I didn't know. It's like when phone machines first came out. And you have this real fancy, like long, like instead of just leave a message.
Yeah.
Like
Who knew
Chris
that you
leave
could
a message.
shoot some sort of ancient Sanskrit email?
How do you get a hold of me? They can send a. Oh my
Like
gosh!
maybe there's like smoke, like some.
What have I done? Yeah, smoke signals. Buy the book.
Go ahead, spell out the email. What is the email? Spell it out.
It's PERELA. Oh, God. I'm sorry. PERELANDRAPUB@gmail.com. That's
Okay.
Paralander Pub.
Paralanderpub@gmail.com. Okay. Well, Chris, it's been wonderful chat. It's good catching up. I haven't seen you, it feels like, in a couple of years, although again, we've been like ships in the night passing at the
Yeah.
border. But it's great to catch up with you. I have a a, a deep and loving place in my heart for you, and it's great
Oh,
chatting.
thank you, brother.
Great seeing you.
Same, same. It's been yeah, it'd be fun just to, sit on a stoop somewhere and tell lies about our past.
That's what we just did.
Oh yeah.
All right, buddy. I hope to see you soon, and I know I will. We'll chat. We'll chat again.
But yeah, send me your address and I will I have a book here with your name on it.
Okay, we'll do. We'll do, Chris. Chris Ahrens,
Thanks so
everybody.
much, Scott.
Thank you, buddy. Bye-bye.